All right, friends, welcome back to the Abel Speaks Podcast. We are still on that caregiving grind here with our friends Brandon and Amber Scuderi and David and Katie Musser, and getting to hear from them and their experiences caregiving with Evalyn and with Izzy and their big siblings. And so this next episode, we're going to break it up kind of in two pieces, because I think this is a big piece of the journey and the ripples of, hey, here's what this looks like, and here's how life looks different. One of the primary areas that it's impossible not to impact is just relationships and socialization, and what did our patterns and our people look like before, and how is that similar now, but how has it changed? How has that been difficult? And so I'll just open it up, and either one of y'all can jump in here first, but just how has, at a high level, how has the journey of caregiving for Izzy and for Evalyn, how has that impacted what y'all's relationships look like in those rhythms and those dynamics?
Yeah, as we're processing through the suffering aspect of this journey, it's interesting how one of those layers is actually the secondary suffering that happens with our friends and our family. And so they're undergoing sorrow as well. And since we're in relationship with them, we are also aware of that. And so there has been a process of needing to talk through that with people, and people who've been vulnerable with us, saying like, we don't even know what to say or how to help you. And we're really heartbroken and we feel kind of debilitated. And so that's it just impacted the relationship. And honestly, I feel like it's deepened relationships where we've gotten to a level in some of these friendships and some of these family relationships where we're able to talk about things that are deeper than the surface level. And so people have often been actually kinder in some ways because they know what we've been walking through. And yet we still run up against the day-to-day life that happens. And there are still expectations upon our family because people aren't walking the same journey we are. And so they're not sure what we need or what limitations we have. And so that's been part of processing this, is needing to be able to learn, one, what is it that we need? What are our limitations? And how do I communicate that with kindness to
those boundaries, right? Kind of what you're talking about.
Yeah, and the boundaries that are needed.
Katie mentioned that secondary suffering, and people would also come and be like, man, you guys are going through, it's not even me that's doing that. And so they would like minimize their own suffering. And so I think a big part of recognizing, like, no, it does impact my siblings, her siblings, our parents, like community members that are grieving this. And just because they're not the one with the special needs kid doesn't minimize the suffering that they're experiencing. So like recognizing and honoring them, like, you're in the pit with us, right? Thank you for being with us.
But even then, I don't know if you guys have found that as well. And I'm sorry if I'm posing a question that I shouldn't, but I know a lot of people who don't have a special needs child, they kind of either want to be in the trenches or they can't and they don't want to, because the suffering that they feel or that they're going through that has nothing to do with a special needs child doesn't equate to what you're walking through. I feel like that's where our struggle, or my personal struggle with families or like friends and normal relationships has come from, is I still want to hear about how you were so mad that you had to sit in a 10-minute waiting line at Starbucks for your coffee. Like, if whatever your struggle is, like, I want to hear it, but then it's almost like they're like, oh, well, this is really, really something I shouldn't be complaining about because I've had that told to me. Like, I can't tell you about this because it doesn't relate or equate to what you're dealing with. And I'm like, but it's still your suffering. I'm not going to minimize what's hard for you because this is hard. So I don't know if that's something you guys have experienced, but I know personally my relationships and my friendships have had that sort of struggle.
Yes, for sure. We've had that experience of just having to talk with friends and say pain is pain. And there is a caution I have with comparison of sorrow and suffering and pain, and having sometimes to be direct and say, it's almost hurtful when it feels like friends are pushing me out of their lives when they're not sharing things with me because they're too worried that I can't handle it. It's like, no, we're friends. This is mutual, even though our circumstances are different.
Yeah. And the like sharing is what brings about intimacy in relationship, right? And so that's really what they're depriving the relationship of by trying to be courteous, of y'all's circumstances. And so that's really interesting. And I can imagine is difficult to navigate.
And I think a really gracious and like empathetic perspective for both of you to have. That wasn't necessarily like the emphasis of the responses I was expecting, in a way that really encouraged me of, hey, it's not just, hey, here's how we feel isolated and on an island sometimes and nobody understands. It's like, oh no, we still desire that connection with other people, and we don't want people to put us on in a different category or on a pedestal in terms of anything. Like, we still desire the same interactions, the same desire for community and connection that we always have, that everybody does. And so I think that's really great for people listening in to know and to hear. And so with that said, internally, I still have to imagine and totally agree, like, hey, comparing, like, unhelpful in virtually every way, a thief of joy, etc. But I would imagine that the day-to-day life of being a caregiving parent, that it does impact your mental load, your emotional capacity, your energy, etc., more than the average parent, in a way that surely extends itself as far as socialization and connection. And so how has that been for you guys on, in terms of an ongoing struggle or?
Yeah, there certainly is different weights to sorrow and suffering. And so we hold those weights differently. Some have pains and suffering that are lighter than others. And so that's how I have to think through the comparison aspect, is it's just that we hold things different in the weight category.
Yeah, I think another aspect is just the decision fatigue that is just overwhelming. So in Izzy's most recent bout with RSV, there's a situation like her oxygen sats are dipping. And so we're trying to keep her high. And then there's just question after question, like, is it a problem with the reader? Is it because she's squirming? Do we need to reset this? Do we need to bump up oxygen? Has she had a poop today? And there's just constant decision turnover on where are we at, and adjusting minute by minute to those things is very overwhelming, particularly when you are also physically fatigued.
I feel like it sort of ebbs and flows. I know Evalyn has had a lot of illnesses in the first year of her life, an incredible amount of hospitalizations. So it now that we're out of that really harder season, I think heavy appointment days can be one of those days and those times or those weeks where my brain is totally done. And it's really hard to kind of keep up, even in a relationship standpoint, like trying to use whatever reserve you have to be intentional with your relationships can kind of be really hard sometimes, because your brain is just always going. And if you're not dealing with one crisis, you're trying to figure out the next one. And then it's a constant ebb and flow of, today was a great day. Let me check on my friends. Today was a really hard day. I don't have the mental capacity for it. But then you kind of like send it anyway, just to spark the conversation, to know that I thought about them.
That's good.
We've had family members who've spent some time in our home with us for a few days or a week or so. And they've said, and it was a good week. And like, Izzy's so easy, and she is, and she's super cute, and she's content, and it kind of looks easy. And then it's just this piece of realizing what's happening in our brain right now is she can't move herself. She can't like run around. She can't communicate. And so we have to help support her in all of those ways. So mentally, I'm thinking about like, I can't just leave her laying on her back for 24 hours a day. And so, yeah, we're sitting having a conversation on our couch and Izzy's here with us. Well, I'm thinking PT, physical therapy. How can, roll her around? How can I get her, or her vestibular apparatus? How can I get her moving? And that's just a constant drain when she's awake, that I'm thinking, how can I help her develop and grow, because she can't do it by herself.
There's always a part of the mind that's on Izzy when she's awake. And so it's like the moment she sleeps, it's like, oh my God, like I can finally breathe for a minute because it's not this little piece of my brain that's constantly chugging.
You get really good at learning a whole nother language without words to try to understand your child, because they can't verbalize. So your brain is always like, okay, they just twitched like this. They just moved like this. They wanted to do this. That's what this means. And unless you actually spend that intentional time with these kiddos, it's really hard to learn them, but they do speak. They just do it without words. And so my brain is always in that capacity, in addition to like the therapy. Well, I can't leave you there all day. What are we going to do today?
Yeah.
So,
have you guys found it difficult to like communicate or explain that mental load to like people, let's say even just like your, closest circle of friends or family, to help them understand that even though maybe it looks like, easy, or it's like, oh, they've got this, they're in a rhythm and a routine. Do you feel like you've been able to find ways to say yes, but also, like you just said, it's like, we can't really turn it off. Like we have to like kind of feel like, on all the time. Do you feel like that's been something you can communicate? And if so, how has that been received?
I'm gonna speak for Amber here for a second. I feel like she has bonded with so many moms that are caregiver moms, and so she has they kind of bond, and they understand, and they talk about those things, and at times because like other people just don't get it in that aspect, like, and she gets burnt out from like the mental capacity and like doing all the things, like thinking about all the things all the time, like she doesn't have energy for some of those other relationships, or just like mental capacity. Not that she necessarily doesn't want them, it's just like draining for her at times.
I've struggled to find ways to communicate to those who aren't caregiving, to understand that mental load. Certainly they can understand the physical load as we write updates to our closest circles, and they can kind of paint, David's really good at writing and painting the picture of what it's looked like in the, recent weeks. But the mental load is really hard to communicate. I'm not sure if anyone can fully empathize until they live it or walk it.
Yeah, Brandon said like people just don't understand. He had that phrase, and it was to go back to your question, I don't think we have been able to communicate that. And there was a level like being at that Stella Effect get together that weekend where it's like, these people get it. Like it was our people that you could tell, there's just a different level of understanding that we haven't felt, around people that don't have a medically complex child.
So for like any caregiving parents that are listening to this right now, like would the advice that you guys would give them in this regard would be like, hey, find other parents that are navigating something similar to kind of be the people that can understand, and maybe not that you shouldn't try to explain to people that are close to you, but just know that might not be something they can fully understand, and maybe lean more on people that are walking through this for that kind of specific relational piece.
Yeah, for sure. I think the social media groups and stuff like have been really helpful for Amber, and I know like she's had a lot of people pour into her, and then she's poured into a lot of people. I mean, for me, I haven't had. I don't know. I guess I don't talk about it a ton with people, but I do have some good friends that I talk about it with, and they don't really understand, but like they empathize, and they understand like what we're going through is difficult, and so I think it is important. I think it's good to have a good mixture though, just because you want to have that people that understand you, but also like it's important to feel that sense of normalcy, and like you're not just a caregiver parent, like you're a person in yourself, and your family is a family in itself, like outside of a diagnosis or a situation.
Yeah, I think coming back to a big takeaway from this one, as I've been listening, is just I kind of had the picture in my head too of like the thought bubbles where it's like, oh, if you almost like a movie screen. It's like if I knew what was happening in that person's head right now, like it's just evidence of like, I don't know what I don't know. There is such a high degree of just ignorance, and even the examples of like, oh, look at that. It just seems, she's doing great. Simple and laid back. And it's like, kind of for the moment, but also here's the things that you don't know that I'm thinking about right now. And so, as Kelly said earlier, just if the core of intimacy and connection is knowing and being known, I've heard you guys say in a few different ways in both directions, which is really great. Just, hey, there are going to be barriers and there are going to be challenges as far as how do we unpack and try and impart some of our day-to-day to be known by people, even when we're totally wiped out and we have brain fatigue and decision, making ambivalence and all of these things. We want to still aspire to that. And then I've heard you guys all say, hey, but also in return, we invite that and we desire that same sense of knowing others. And so I think you guys have said really beautifully, some of the challenges, some of the obstacles to ongoing relationships, but also I think some of the transcendent desires of, hey, we didn't cross into this separate category where now we think about relationships and community differently. We still have those core God-given desires, and it looks different. We're doing it imperfectly. We're learning as we're going, and so are our loved ones. But that's what it is to be in relationship. And so we'll stop there on this one, and then we'll get really practical in kind of a part 2 to this question in the next episode. And so for now, we'll wrap up this one. We'll catch you next time on the Abel Speaks podcast.